We thought she was just another shadow in the night, a wild bobcat who never came close. But then, one freezing evening, she stepped out of the darkness, carrying a newborn kitten in her mouth. Not to protect it, not to run away. She brought it to us, and what she did next changed everything we thought we knew about wild animals. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. The evening air clung to the skin like ice. A silence had settled over the street, broken only by the rustle of wind and the faint crunch of gravel beneath retreating paws. The last of the stray cats had eaten and vanished, melting into the darkness behind dumpsters and low fences. We sat in the car, heater humming softly, eyes scanning the shadows as we always did this time of night. A routine: refill the food bowls, wait, watch. Most nights ended with an empty street and the satisfaction of full bellies somewhere in the dark. But that night, something changed. A flicker of movement caught our eyes, a blur of tawny fur. At first, we thought it was just another feral, maybe the skinny calico we'd seen limping last week. But when the figure stepped into the orange glow of the streetlight, we froze. It was her, the bobcat, the wild one who never came close, who watched from behind the trash bins, golden eyes unblinking, always still as stone. She had never touched the food, never approached us, not even when hunger must have clawed at her ribs. But tonight, she was different. She didn't slink. She didn't hide. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, her paws making no sound on the pavement, and in her jaws, limp but alive, was a kitten, tiny, trembling, squirming weakly. She crossed the distance between the bushes and our car in seconds. Without a sound, she leapt onto the car's open door, her claws scraping slightly against the metal. And then, she dropped the kitten onto the seat. Not roughly, gently, our breath caught. She didn't stay, didn't wait. Her body turned sharply, disappearing back into the darkness. We barely had time to look down at the fragile bundle of fur on the seat when she returned, another kitten hanging from her jaws. She placed it beside the first and vanished once more. Again and again, 6 times. Each time her breath came quicker. Her sides heaved from the effort, but her movements never lost their care. One by one, she delivered them to us, mewling, weak, shivering kittens, not abandoned, not discarded, entrusted. And then, she didn't leave. She stayed by the car, pacing, claws clicking against the asphalt, eyes wide and frantic. She pawed at the ground, turning in anxious circles, then looked at us, really looked at us. There was something wild in her gaze, but beneath the wildness, desperation, and trust. We stepped out cautiously. She didn't back away. Instead, she came closer. Close enough to tug at our trousers with her claws, her teeth clenched but not threatening. She wasn't asking for food. She was asking for help. She led us away from the car, each step urgent, her tail flicking sharply as if to say, "Follow me." Now we moved quickly, the cold biting at our fingers, her golden eyes glinting every time she turned back to check that we were still behind her. Through the overgrown grass and brittle weeds, she slipped into a small thicket just off the road. The brush was low and tangled, nearly invisible in the dark, but she moved through it like a ghost. Then she stopped, dead still, and looked back at us. At her feet, half buried in a patch of frozen dirt, was a kitten. So small, so terribly still. Its fur was frosted over and its limbs didn't twitch, didn't curl. A breath caught in our throat. The others had been weak, but alive. This one? A man stepped out from a nearby porch, drawn by the sound of rustling. His voice was quiet, solemn. "Lost one already," he murmured. The cold got to it. But the bobcat wasn't ready to let go. She nudged the kitten's side with her nose, gently at first, then more urgently. Her ears flattened. She circled it, pawed at the ground, and finally turned to us with a look that pierced straight through skin and bone. It wasn't just fear. It was pleading. We moved fast. The kitten was cold to the touch, almost weightless in our hands. We wrapped it in the only blanket we had and rushed back to the car, heart hammering. The mother bobcat jumped in after us, not hesitating, not caring about the human scent. She pressed herself against the carrier where the other kittens huddled and leaned into the blanket, her breath warm against the tiny body. Every bump in the road made her muscles tighten. Every red light was a curse. We whispered soft reassurances. Words meant more for ourselves than her, but she never took her eyes off the bundle in our lap. Her breath came in short bursts. Her eyes flicked from the blanket to our hands and back again. "Will you save them?" her gaze seemed to ask. At the vet, the warmth of the clinic felt jarring after the cold. Fluorescent lights, clinical smells. But there was no time to think. The kitten was whisked away, tiny limbs limp, placed on a heating pad, monitored for vitals. "Severe hypothermia," the vet said. "But there's still a chance." The bobcat paced the waiting room, restless and wild, sniffing the air, ears twitching at every sound. When she caught the faintest mewl from her other kittens, now in a safe room behind glass, she bolted toward it, only to stop short and turn back toward the exam room. She didn't eat. She didn't rest. Her world had narrowed to a single question. Where is my baby? Back home, the house was quiet. The other 6 kittens lay curled together in a basket lined with fleece, their tiny bodies finally warm, their bellies full. They stirred only slightly when we adjusted the blanket or whispered to check on them. But the mother bobcat, she couldn't settle. She moved through the room like a restless shadow. Her claws clicked softly against the hardwood floors as she circled again and again, nose to the ground, eyes darting to every corner. She checked behind doors, under furniture, even climbed onto low shelves in a silent, urgent search. She wasn't looking at what was. She was looking for what was missing. Then Luna, one of our own, entered the room. A sleek, silver-furred domestic cat with a calm, knowing presence, Luna had always been gentle, maternal in her own quiet way. She padded toward the basket of kittens with her tail raised, ears forward. At first, we braced ourselves. The mother bobcat was still wild, still on edge. But she didn't move. She simply watched. Luna sniffed the pile of kittens, then lay down beside them, curling her body protectively around the smallest. Her purring began almost immediately, low, rhythmic, comforting. She nuzzled one kitten's head and licked another's tiny ear. It was as if she'd decided they were hers too. The bobcat sat still, watching. Her breathing slowed. Her fur lay flat again, but peace didn't last. From the hallway, Jazzy appeared. Our other cat, dark-furred and sharp-eyed, always the skeptic. One look at the basket, and her body tensed. Her ears flattened. A low growl welled up in her chest as she stalked forward. Without hesitation, she swatted at the nearest kitten, claws sheathed but firm. Her message was clear. They don't belong here. The response was instant. The bobcat lunged, not with malice, but with primal force. She placed herself between Jazzy and her young, body lowered, fur bristling, lips drawn back in a silent snarl. No noise, no warning. But the wild in her was unmistakable. Jazzy backed down, retreating to a corner with a low hiss, tail lashing behind her. The bobcat stood over her kittens, chest heaving. We didn't intervene. And slowly, the air settled. The bobcat turned back to her litter, nudging them into a tighter circle. She began to lick their fur one by one, her movements slower now, more intentional. She curled around them tightly, protectively. It was no longer just instinct. It was choice. She had lost one. She would not lose another. But even as her body curled into theirs, her eyes kept drifting to the door. Every creak of the floor, every shadow, every passing breeze, Her ears would twitch and her gaze would snap toward it. She was waiting for something, or someone. The next morning, just after dawn, the vet called. "She's stable," he said. "Stronger heartbeat. Breathing has improved. But she's not out of the woods." Relief came sharp and sudden, followed by a fresh wave of worry. We thanked him, asked to be updated the moment anything changed, then hung up and turned to the mother bobcat, still lying beside her kittens, still waiting. She hadn't moved from her post all night, not even when we brought her food. She only ate when we placed it inches from her mouth, and even then, she chewed mechanically, distractedly, her eyes never far from the door. That evening, we tried something different. We brought her the blanket the sick kitten had been wrapped in. It still held his scent, faint but familiar. When we placed it gently beside her, she sniffed it once, then again, more urgently. And then, she made a sound we hadn't heard before. A low, aching chirp. It wasn't quite a meow, not quite a growl. It was something rawer. A question dragged through sorrow. She pawed at the blanket with her claws, pulled it toward her chest, curled around it like it was a piece of him she could still protect. Luna, sensing the ache, pressed close to her side. The two cats, one wild, one tame, sat shoulder to shoulder, purring in different tones, bound by something that needed no translation. Days passed. The kittens grew stronger. Their eyes began to open, their movements grew bolder, their cries louder and more playful. They wrestled and pawed and tumbled, their tiny claws catching on the soft fleece as they explored their little world. But Kaia, the name we had begun to call her, meaning pure in an old language, remained on edge. She licked her kittens with tender precision, but her mind was always elsewhere. Her ears pricked at every sound outside. Her gaze flicked toward the windows when the wind picked up. She was waiting, and then the call came. "She's ready to come home," the vet said. "The little one. He made it." We didn't breathe until we had the carrier in the car. Inside, the kitten wriggled and squirmed, his fur fluffed out, his eyes wide and blinking at the light. He was stronger now, still small but full of energy. His mules were sharp and confident. The drive back felt different, like everything was holding its breath. We opened the front door. Kaia was already pacing, her body tense, her nose to the floor. But the moment the carrier crossed the threshold, she stopped, frozen. Then her head turned sharply, her ears locked forward. She knew. Kaia moved like lightning. In two swift, silent strides, she crossed the room, her nose pressed against the carrier before we could even set it down. She inhaled deeply, once, twice, and then let out a soft, rumbling purr, so low it was almost a growl. Her tail quivered, her body trembled, not with fear, but with overwhelming relief. We opened the carrier door. A small, wide-eyed kitten tumbled out, letting out a single indignant mewl as he flopped onto the floor. He was stronger, yes, but still wobbly. Still small enough that the world seemed too big for him. Kaia crouched low, watching. Then, recognition. She chirped. That same strange, warbling sound. But this time, it was no longer mournful. It was joy. She reached forward and licked the kitten from nose to tail, her tongue fast and urgent, her paws gently pinning him in place as if afraid he might vanish again. The kitten mewled once more, then burrowed into her chest, kneading her fur with his tiny paws. She curled around him, tucking him beneath her body with the rest of her litter. All her babies, together again. Luna sat nearby, her tail curled neatly around her feet, watching the reunion with slow, blinking approval. Even Jazzy, still sulking from her corner, let out a low huff and looked away, as if conceding that some battles weren't worth fighting. Kaia didn't sleep that night, at least not right away. She stayed curled around her kittens, licking them, nuzzling them, listening to every sound they made. Her body rose and fell with each slow breath, but her eyes remained open, watchful, grateful. still alert from days of fear. Eventually, though, exhaustion won. Her breathing evened out, her head lowered onto her paws. The kittens nestled tightly against her sides, their tiny bellies full, their dreams quiet and warm, and for the first time since she had entered our lives, Kaia slept. Outside, the wind howled, but it could not touch them now. Inside that little room, wrapped in fleece and fur and silence, a fragile trust had bloomed, not just between Kaia and her kittens, but between her and us, between wild and tame, between fear and faith. In those hours, we learned something we hadn't expected, that love wasn't limited by species or language or fear, that sometimes trust begins with a single desperate act and ends with peace. The days that followed unfolded in quiet rhythm, feedings, naps, the occasional chaos of a kitten knocking over a water bowl, but within the softness of routine, something profound was happening. Kaia had begun to change. The tension in her shoulders lessened. The sharp dart of her eyes softened. She still kept a respectful distance from us. Her instincts weren't gone, but now, when our hands reached toward the kittens, she no longer sprang to her feet. She watched, yes, but with a kind of tentative approval. She had started to believe we were not a threat. Luna remained close. Her maternal calm became a comfort not just to the kittens but to Kaia herself. They would lie beside one another now, their bodies almost touching, their purring overlapping in strange harmony. Even Jazzy, though never affectionate, had stopped growling. Once, we caught her perched high on a shelf, watching the kittens play with an expression that almost resembled curiosity. The sickliest kitten, the one we'd nearly lost, had become the boldest. He climbed the tallest cushions, led his siblings into every open drawer, and fearlessly batted at Luna's tail with tiny, determined paws. We began calling him Ember because he burned with life. It was Ember, too, who first approached us on his own. One morning, as we sat cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of food nearby, he waddled over, his white-tipped tail twitching with mischief. He pawed at our pant leg, then climbed unsteadily into our lap. Kaia watched from across the room. She didn't move to stop him. Instead, she stood, lifted Ember by the scruff like she had that first cold night, and carried him halfway across the room. Then, she set him down at our feet. It wasn't desperation, it wasn't fear. It was something else, a gift, a gesture that said, "You helped me. I trust you now." That moment stayed with us, even more than the reunion, even more than the rescue. We knew then that Kaia's journey wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. Still, a question had lingered like a shadow. What happens next? We debated everything, whether to keep them, find them a sanctuary, or let Kaia lead them back into the wild. The idea of releasing her, of letting go, felt impossible after all that had happened. But then we realized it had to be her choice. She had trusted us with her young, with her fear, with her grief. Now we had to trust her. The first snowfall came quietly. A hush fell over the yard, and everything, trees, rooftops, fences, was dusted in white. It felt like the world had paused, waiting. That morning, we opened the door to the outdoor enclosure Kaia and her kittens had grown used to. We didn't coax, we didn't carry, we simply stepped back and let the wind speak for us. Kaia stood in the doorway, her body tense. Her ears swiveled at the sound of birds overhead, her nose lifted to the scent of pine and snow. Behind her, the kittens hesitated, blinking up at her, then at us. Then slowly, Kaia stepped forward. The cold met her paws like an old memory. She paused just past the door, turned, and looked at us. One final glance, her golden eyes filled with something hard to name. Gratitude, maybe even goodbye. Then she moved again, fluid, certain, into the trees. The kittens followed in a clumsy line, still unsure of their footing on the snow. Ember paused at the edge, his white-tipped tail flicking. For a second, he looked back at us, his eyes wide as if to remember, and then he bounded after his mother, gone. The house felt impossibly quiet afterward, but that silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. In the weeks that followed, we kept the food bowls full, built better shelters, added heated pads as winter deepened. And though we didn't expect it, we hoped. Sometimes, late at night when the porch light flickered just right, we'd swear we saw movement beyond the trees. A shape, low and swift, eyes that gleamed gold before vanishing into the dark. Then, one bitter morning, it happened. She returned. Kaia. Her winter coat was thick now, her posture confident, even regal. She walked up to the feeding station as if it were always hers. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her trailed two newcomers, a skinny tabby and an older calico with a torn ear. Strays, hungry, frightened. She turned back once, nosed them forward, and let them eat first. She'd brought them to us, just like she once brought her kittens. The cycle had begun again. Word of Kaia spread through our neighborhood. Then the community. Then the local university. Researchers came to study her, baffled by her behavior. How a wild bobcat had bridged the divide between stray and sanctuary, between wild and domestic. She's teaching both sides how to trust, one biologist whispered, watching her from a distance, voice thick with awe. Ember, nearly grown now, was her shadow. He followed her everywhere. But he also returned alone, boldly brushing against our legs, curling into our laps, purring like he was born for it. Maybe he was. And on the anniversary of that freezing night, when everything changed, we found something waiting for us. A single, perfect bobcat feather, placed gently atop a flat stone near the feeding bowl. A message, or a memory, or maybe just the wind. The seasons turned. Spring melted into summer, and with it came new faces. More strays drawn to the sanctuary Kaia had claimed as her own. Some came broken. Some came cautious. But none left hungry. The feeding station became more than a stop for scraps. It became a kind of refuge, shaped by quiet hands and wild hearts. We added insulated shelters, heated bowls, fresh bedding when the nights grew cold. Not just for Kaia, but for whoever might come after her. And they did. Ember became a legend in his own right. The bold one. The fearless one. He would perch on the porch railing like a sentinel, greeting volunteers, rubbing against children's ankles. He slept in the sun, chased leaves across the yard, purred like thunder when Luna bathed his face. But no matter how tame he seemed, there was always something untouchable in his eyes. A flicker of the wild, a memory of frost and fur, and a mother who had once defied her instincts to ask for help. Kaia remained Kaia. Not domesticated, not claimed, but present. She came and went with the wind, her arrivals silent and sudden. Sometimes she stayed an hour, sometimes a week. We never knew when she'd appear. But when she did, the world felt right again. There were no collars, no cages, no boundaries, only trust. The kind that's earned, never forced, the kind that changes everything. One evening, we found her sunbathing in the tall grass behind the old thicket, her body stretched long, her belly exposed to the sky. Ember lay beside her, licking his paws. Around them, a half-dozen kittens, strays from other mothers, pounced and tumbled, oblivious to the history wrapped in fur. Kaia lifted her head and looked at us. She didn't run. She didn't flinch. She just watched. And for the briefest moment it felt like something eternal passed between us, something that couldn't be spoken, only understood. A promise that the wild and the tame aren't so different after all, that survival can be a beginning, not an end, that sometimes the ones we save us right back. We still leave an extra bowl out each night, still check for paw prints in the snow, still pause when we see eyes glowing in the shadows, And sometimes, when the stars are just right and the wind is quiet, we think we see her, a flash of golden fur, a flick of a tail, gone before we can be sure. But that's the thing about miracles. They never stay. They just pass through, like wild hearts on borrowed time, leaving behind paw prints that never fade.